Just finished Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, so I'm going to talk about it, share my feelings, talk about the reading experience. I don't really have that much intelligent to say about this book, and that will become evident once the review gets going. But you know how this channel works. Whenever I finish a book, I always have to give my 2 cents on it, find something to talk about. So, this book was recommended to me quite strongly by a good friend of mine about 10 years ago. It actually came out in 2009, and I am now aware, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but researching this book a little bit, it was very highly praised back in 2009. I tend to be a little bit out of things, and the fact that I live abroad, I'm sure, doesn't help. So I wasn't aware of it until about 10 years ago when a friend of mine was telling me what a great book he was reading about Thomas Cromwell. And I said, Thomas Cromwell? How good can the book be? I mean, how interesting is that story going to be? But he was adamant that it was a very good book. And since then, I've actually known a number of friends, coworkers, colleagues who have read this book and thought very highly of it. So, sooner or later I had to get around to it. Not to mention BookTube. This book has been very popular on BookTube. In fact, I kind of feel like I'm the last person to get around to reading this. Like everybody else on BookTube has already talked about this book. It feels like that, at least. On the other hand, I am aware that there are a number of people out there who have no idea about this book, and some of them may be on YouTube. So I'll try and give a brief background on this before I jump into it. This is a historical novel about Thomas Cromwell, who was one of King Henry VIII's advisors. Now, King Henry VIII went through a number of advisors. He went through advisors like he went through wives. I guess he had a somewhat volatile temper. He loved you until he didn't love you anymore, and then it was to the chopping block to get your head cut off. But Cromwell was his best advisor. Henry VIII had, I think everyone's familiar with the basic history, right? Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from his current wife to marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope wouldn't let him. He was trying to establish his own church then, to establish the Church of England. And there were a number of tricky things to navigate, and his previous advisors couldn't do it. But then in stepped Thomas Cromwell, who was kind of like the magic man. He could just get things done. And he got a number of things done for Henry, and was able to guide Henry through a number of tricky situations, and was very famous as Henry's right-hand man who could just solve things. Until he fell out of favor, and then Henry chopped his head off. Now, this is the first of 3 books in the Thomas Cromwell trilogy. At the moment, I've only read this one, although the next 2 are on my to-read list, and I'll, stay tuned to this channel. I'll read those ones next. But I'm given to understand that this book is kind of about the rise of Thomas Cromwell. The next book is about Thomas Cromwell at the height of his powers. And then I guess the 3rd book is supposed to be about the fall of Thomas Cromwell. But yeah, this is the first book in the series talking about the rise of Thomas Cromwell. I'm a history geek. Was a history major back in school. Became a certified history teacher after college. So I really go in for this history stuff. Now, the Tudors aren't my favorite era of history, but so much is written about it that you really can't avoid it. And, if you're a history geek, you're kind of interested in all history to a certain extent, if you can find somebody to tell it in an engaging way. So I guess my his background in this was Monarchy by David Starkey, which I did as an audiobook, and I listened to several times over because I had it on audio. And it was a time when I didn't have a lot of other audio things to listen to. And this Sceptred Isle, which was a BBC radio series on the history of Britain, both of which spend a few hours on Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell. And then the Showtime TV series, The Tudors, which I don't know if anyone still remembers this series, but it was famous maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, which was on Showtime and ran for 4 seasons, telling the story of the reign of King Henry VIII. I watched it from start to finish. I got the box set when I was living in Cambodia, some of those illegally pirated DVDs that you get in Cambodia. Don't judge me. And as I watched it, I do what you do nowadays when you watch these type of things, is I kept one eye on Wikipedia as I was watching the episodes, right? So you watch an episode, check Wikipedia to see what was true, what was not true. Watched an episode, check Wikipedia. And for my money, and take this with a grain of salt because my main source of information is Wikipedia. I'm not a scholar. But I thought that Tudors TV show was pretty historically accurate in the broad strokes. I know the small details, they changed all kinds of small things, but in the broad strokes, I thought the characters there seemed to line up with the historical record for almost all of them. I guess the king's sister being the one notable exception. But anyways, I'm not here to talk about the Tudors TV show. I'm just mentioning that by way of my background in this period. I guess the point being, I knew something about it, but was no means an expert on it. One of the things that I noted at the time when I wrote up a little review of the Tudors TV show on my blog is how many people there are walking around in this era named Thomas. So that there's Thomas Cromwell, who's the protagonist of this book, and then there's Thomas More, there's Thomas Wolsey, there's Thomas Cranmer, there's Thomas Boleyn, the father of Anne Boleyn, there's Thomas Wriothesley, there's other Thomases who are going to pop up later in this story, Thomas Howard, Thomas Seymour, Thomas Culpeper, Thomas Darcy. It just seems like every other person in this book at the time is named Thomas. And in fact, there's even a joke about it. One line in this book, half the world is named Thomas. Now, this is a small digression, but indulge me here. Does anybody know what was going on? I can't seem to find any explanation for why everybody was named Thomas. It seems a little bit strange to me that it was such a popular name at the time. I mean, there was no King Thomas, right? That they would all be named after. There was, of course, the Thomas in the Gospels, the disciple of Jesus. But my understanding is he did not have a great reputation in medieval Christendom. And maybe I'm missing something. I'm going back to my Bible lessons in 8th grade, but I thought, Thomas had been labeled as doubting Thomas, right? The Thomas who didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead until he actually saw him in person. And that's kind of like his main trait in the Gospels. Now, I know there's a whole separate Gnostic tradition about Thomas, the twin brother of Jesus, but that Gnostic tradition was not popular in Tudor England, right? So we're only going off of the Gospels here, right? So why was Thomas such a popular name? Why was everybody named Thomas? I've been curious about this for years. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments. Just a little digression there. But anyways. Where was I? Yeah, so a historical novel about Thomas Cromwell. And yeah, this book is about his rise. He was somebody in Wolsey's household. Cardinal Wolsey was the former right hand man of the king, and Thomas Wolsey, had his downfall because he could not get King Henry what he wanted. And what King Henry wanted was a divorce from his wife so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Thomas Wolsey couldn't work it out, so ultimately he lost the king's favor, which led to his arrest, and he died shortly after the arrest. And then there are various versions of why he died. I mean, I think the official version is that he was just sick from stress and overwork at that point. So he just died from exhaustion. But another version is that he committed suicide, or he swallowed some sort of poison or something once he realized what was happening to him. Thomas Cromwell was one of Wolsey's men, and I think that again, from what I can tell from Wikipedia, the usual view is that he distanced himself from Wolsey once he realized what was happening and was able to survive the fall of Wolsey and kind of step into Wolsey's shoes by just kind of stepping away at the right moment. The version portrayed in this historical novel is that Thomas Cromwell was loyal to Wolsey until the end. And Wolsey was like a father figure to him. And based on what I've picked up, there in the subsequent novel, I think Hilary Mantel is going to portray Thomas Cromwell as looking to get revenge on the people who ruined Wolsey. Because, yeah, not only did Wolsey lose his favor with the king, but there were all these people who were jealous of him, who turned on him once they realized he was vulnerable, which I think is going to be a reoccurring theme in Tudor history. So there is King Henry VIII, who's the king, but there are also a bunch of competing noble families, and they get jealous of each other, and they turn on each other once they smell blood in the water. And I think that's going to be the fall of Anne Boleyn coming up, and ultimately that'll be the fall of Thomas Cromwell. Although Cromwell doesn't come from a noble family. That's what makes him unique. That's a point that's emphasized over and over again in this book, is that he comes from humble origins. He comes from nothing. The son of a blacksmith, to be brought up to this very high position where he's the right-hand man of the king. So he's got a very interesting personal story. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Oh, and by the way, spoilers. I mean, I don't know if spoilers count in historical fiction because it's all a matter of historical record. But spoilers, I'm getting into the plot of this book. So Thomas Wolsey has his fall in this book. Thomas Cromwell takes his place. Thomas Cromwell is given the job of trying to get the king what he wants. What the king wants is a divorce. The Pope won't grant it to him. So Thomas Cromwell, with a few other like-minded people, shepherds in the break with Rome in the English Reformation. Thomas Cromwell, I think he, even in the official historical record, was always sympathetic to the Protestant Reformation. But in this book, Hilary Mantel definitely makes him out to be an ideologue, somebody who has opinions about religion in England and is using that to guide it. again, getting back into general history, I think everybody knows that the English Reformation came about just because King Henry VIII wanted a divorce. But beneath that, there were genuine Protestant reformers who were trying to push this or guide this or take advantage of a window of opportunity to change the culture and religion in England. Up until Henry had his troubles getting the divorce, Henry was a very staunch Catholic. He got the label from the Pope as a defender of the faith. And was keen to stamp out Lutheranism and heresy in his realm. And this was a time, excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat here, which doesn't seem to be going away, but what can you do? I'm going to keep going here. This was a time when people were getting burned at the stake for reading the Bible in English. You were not allowed to translate the Bible in English. The common people were not even supposed to read the Bible. There was William Tyndale, who was a reformer who translated the Bible in English. He had to flee from England into Antwerp, which I forget what country was Antwerp in. I should have looked this up before I did the review. Somewhere in Europe, Holy Roman Empire. So he's in hiding in Antwerp, publishing the Bible in English and having it smuggled back into England. And if he's caught, he would be burned at the stake. People in England, the Lollards or the various religious dissenters, who deny that the communion bread is actually the reincarnation of the body of Christ, or who deny infant baptism, are getting burned alive at the stake. Yeah, I mean, a couple of points to make, I guess. First of all, this is a book which seeks to bring that home in all its horrible reality. So there are some descriptions of people being burned at the stake, and they, it's not so graphic. I mean, it could be worse, but there are just enough details to get you to think about it. For example, that talks about the smell of it. It talks about, what happens to the blood. I think one woman says, people think that they don't bleed when they're getting burned at the stake, but I've seen them bleed. So you just, I don't want to spoil anyone's dinner here, but you do kind of visualize the full horror of the body being set on fire, fire which starts at the feet and slowly works its way up, and the long lingering painful death that is of being slowly burned alive. And we all know people were burned at the stake back in the day. But it is kind of the historical detail that you kind of think to yourself, well, that's just the way they did it back in the day. They owned slaves, women couldn't vote, they burned at the stake. It was just the culture. And you don't really think about maybe how awful it really was, maybe. Or at least you don't think about that all the time. This is a book which forces you to think about it. Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, was a fan of this book and wrote a review about it. And, Christopher Hitchens' big shtick, I guess especially near the end of his life, was all the atrocities that are committed by religious people. So he quite liked that aspect of the book, which would surprise no one, even though everybody in this book is religious. I mean, there are no atheists in this book. It's just the people being burned at the stake are just as religious as the people who are burning them at the stake. They're just being burned for having different religious views. But Hitchens actually, in his review, said something which made me think. He said the George Orwell, when he wrote 1984, had modeled it on the Protestant Reformation, which I don't know if that's true in the sense George Orwell was consciously doing it, but Hitchens makes a good point. He says in 1984, there's that book which the party members have, and nobody outside the party is allowed to read. You're not even allowed to read the book that explains the party apparatus. And the Christendom during the pre-Reformation days was the same. You weren't even allowed to read the book, the Bible, in English, or you could get burned at the stake for reading the Bible in English or having an English copy of the Bible. So that all is going on in the book. There's the religious tension of the day. Tyndale's English Bible being snuck in, Tyndale hiding out in Antwerp, various religious dissenters being picked up by King Henry's soldiers. I want to say police, but police is an anachronism, isn't it? There weren't police back then, but soldiers, guards, agents of the state, whatever they were back then, under Thomas More. Come back to that later. And burned at the stake. And then there's also the personal drama of King Henry trying to get a divorce from his wife and marry Anne Boleyn. Now, at the end of this book, Henry is married to Anne Boleyn, and Anne Boleyn is still alive and well and having enormous influence, but we all know where this is headed, right? Every school child knows that Anne Boleyn got beheaded by King Henry. I think this is one of those things everybody knows, right? But King Henry was the only king of England to behead his wives. And not just one, but two of them. It's the kind of thing you're like, is it strange that we had a king behead two wives, or is it strange that this didn't happen more often in history, right? I mean, because if you think about it, you must have had a whole lot of kings of England who were pissed off with their wives, right? I mean, it's something that happens to married couples, right? How come Henry was the only one who beheaded his wives and the other ones put up with his wives? Put up with their wives. I guess one clue which we do get in Wolf Hall, a point which gets emphasized over and over again, is Anne Boleyn is not from a noble family, or at least not from a family that's noble enough to be considered eligible for the queenship. In fact, earlier in the book, Anne Boleyn is engaged to Harry Percy, who was one of the dukes of the northern lands. And again, this is all real history. I mean, this is historical fiction based on real history. And Cardinal Wolsey ends up squashing the marriage because the Boleyn family is not noble enough to marry a duke. And little does Cardinal Wolsey know that Anne Boleyn is going to angle for the king next and successfully get him. And the whole rest of Europe is like, what are you doing? Why are you ruining your perfectly good marriage with Catherine, who's from Spain and is alliance with the Holy Roman Empire? I guess she was the aunt of the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. So because kings were supposed to marry for alliances at the time, right? So he was throwing away this alliance, and he wasn't marrying another princess. He was just marrying this relative nobody who he was just infatuated with. And the way it's portrayed in this historical novel is all the people around King Henry want to give King Henry what he wants, but the other rulers in Europe are just saying, they're calling Anne Boleyn the king's whore. They can't believe that the king is actually going to be serious about wrecking his European alliances to marry just somebody. But he was genuinely in love. King Henry was. But then I guess this will be happening in the next book. The other side of that is when he falls out of love, there's going to be nobody to protect Anne Boleyn, and then she's just some girl. And I guess that's perhaps why she was vulnerable to getting her head cut off. All that will be coming in the next book. At the end of this book, Anne Boleyn is still alive and well, but this book ends with Thomas More getting his head cut off. Now, Thomas More is famously portrayed as a martyr under one of the martyrs of King Henry's reign, and he's the subject of a play which was made into a famous movie called A Man for All Seasons, which I regret to say I've not seen, and I really should have by now. I've heard about it. I don't know. I've never been able to track down a copy. While I was reading Wolf Hall, to back up here a moment, if you'll follow me on this, there were references to a son-in-law of Thomas More called Will Roper, and something about how he was changing religions, but they were unexplained references. So, as you do, I got on Wikipedia and looked up William Roper. And according to Wikipedia, he's a very important character in the play/movie A Man for All Seasons. And then I got the impression from that Hilary Mantel must be assuming that a lot of her audience is familiar with A Man for All Seasons and is kind of playing off of that. I was not able to track down a copy of A Man for All Seasons, although I've watched a lot of clips of it on YouTube. And some of those clips, actually, it's interesting how closely they line up with what's portrayed in this book, although it's really only the last bit of the book, which is the trial of Thomas More. I'm not sure about how much Hilary Mantel is playing off of that movie, or how much it is they're drawing from the same historical record. Steve Donoghue, who's done a series of videos on this book, and who I should make clear that I'm influenced by Steve. He's a smarter man than I am, so I take my cues from him. Steve Donoghue says she's definitely playing off of that movie, and he quotes part which is I guess a direct quote from the movie/play, and then shows how Hilary Mantel subverts that part. But as Steve explains it much better than I can, I'll just leave a link to his videos in my description down below. But yeah, Thomas More, to come back to what I was originally saying, is frequently portrayed as a saint, and then Thomas Cromwell is frequently portrayed as like this evil hatchet man who helps to engineer his downfall. Hilary Mantel reverses those portrayals. So here, Thomas More is the bad guy, and Thomas Cromwell is the good guy. And Hilary Mantel shows in this book how Thomas More was behind the persecution of all these English Protestants who wanted to read the Bible in English, or who denied that the communion was a reincarnation of Jesus' physical body. Protestants think that communion is just symbolically eating Jesus' body, whereas Catholics believe that at the moment the priest blesses the bread, it actually physically becomes a reincarnation of Jesus's body. Is my understanding. I grew up Protestant myself, but that was one of the reasons people were getting burned at the stake in this case. Anyways, Thomas More is portrayed as their persecutor. Now, again, I went to Wikipedia because that's where you go. And Wikipedia said, yeah, there's considerable controversy about how culpable Thomas More was in the persecution of heretics during this time. And they reference Wolf Hall as one portrayal in one direction, and then A Man for All Seasons, I guess, as a portrayal in the other direction. But I got the impression from Wikipedia that the portrayal in Wolf Hall is one legitimate portrayal. That perhaps Thomas More was this religious zealot who was persecuting and having people burnt at the stake. I mean, there's no controversy that these people got burnt at the stake. I guess the controversy is how culpable Thomas More was in all this, apparently. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. I don't really know what I'm talking about. Or let me know in the comments if you know anything about this. Yeah. To come back to what I was saying, I guess Thomas More is portrayed as the bad guy in this book, Thomas Cromwell as the good guy. Although I will say I read a couple reviews of this book before I started it, which made me think that they would be completely what's the word I'm looking for? Completely sworn enemies. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know if I'm misinterpreting this. But I was a little bit surprised, contrary to my expectation. I thought Hilary Mantel portrays them much more as frenemies. So that even at the end, they're on opposite sides of this issue. Thomas Cromwell knows that he's going to have to put Thomas More to death because Thomas More is being obstinate. Thomas More knows that Cromwell is going to put him to death. But they still have kind of a grudging respect for each other. They still... Thomas Cromwell wants to save Thomas More, was the impression I got from this book. I mean, it in the context of this historical novel. The Cromwell in this novel wants to save Thomas More, but Anne Boleyn is unrelenting. She is not going to forgive Thomas More, and so the king is going to demand it. So Cromwell just has to kind of go through with it. But Cromwell in this book is trying so hard to get Thomas More to just say the oath, save himself, just save himself. And again, I'm according to Wikipedia, because that's where I go. Wikipedia says that Thomas Cromwell did visit Thomas More several times in prison, just talking with him, trying to get him to recant and say the oath. But Thomas More just wouldn't do it. So I guess there is some historical basis for that portrayal of the relationship, I guess. Yeah. I'll tell you, I'm not very good at this book reviewing thing, because I'm about 34 minutes into this review, and I really haven't said the main points about this book. The main things maybe that I want to say about it, or that somebody would need to know about this book, which is that this is a historical novel, but it's also written as a work of literature. Steve Donoghue in his videos says several times, this is a historical novel unlike any you've ever written before. Any ever written before, unlike any you've ever read before. So normally the type of people who are drawn to historical novels, and I say this as somebody who's one of those type of people, They're drawn to it because they want to learn the history. They want to learn the history. So they want to know who did what, when, where, and they don't want a scholarly work. They want it told as a story, but they want to get caught up in the historical narrative of what was the historical drama, who got killed when. Just give me all these juicy historical details. And what's unique about Wolf Hall is it's not that type of book. It is a book which is written for people who appreciate good prose. Lots of descriptions of stuff, lots of carefully written sentences. Sometimes the book will spend a couple pages not really advancing the plot, just kind of describing a family scene or giving you a portrait of what Cromwell was like as a person. I think, as Steve Donoghue says in his videos, it's a very intimate, personal portrayal of Cromwell. I struggled with that when reading this book, because I am not the kind of person who usually appreciates that kind of prose, and I say that admitting that this is a flaw in myself. I wish I was a better reader, but here we are. I really like to get historical fiction and just give me the information. Don't waste my time on this literary descriptions. I tend to lose interest in literary descriptions. I think with this book, the problem was not so much losing interest. The problem was these more poetic descriptions, just trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. There were a few passages, and there were only a few. It was not the majority of the book, but it was enough to affect the reading experience, where I wasn't really quite sure what was going on. You read a paragraph, you're like, okay, what was that? Go back, read it again, read the page again, think, okay, there's something happening here. I'm a little bit unclear as to who was saying what, because the dialogue attribution was a little bit unclear. I'm a little bit unclear as to what the characters actually were doing, because I don't know. You know what I mean? That it was just descriptions where the author is deliberately being ambiguous in order to kind of draw you in, or I guess Steve Donoghue has said in his videos, it's a kind of book where not everything is laid out on the page for you. You have to work a little bit for it. Plus very stylized descriptions. So the types of people who have praised this book very highly are all people who really enjoy the prose style of this book. On the other hand, I know, because I've seen some of your videos on BookTube, some people have struggled with this book. I've seen some of your videos with it. My own estimation is, at least as far as the prose style goes, I struggled with it periodically. I don't know, 1 page out of 30 maybe would leave me a little bit confused as to what was going on. But that's only 1 page out of 30. On the whole, I thought it was readable on the whole. And so certainly to anyone out there, I've gotten one comment already from somebody who said, I've been meaning to read Wolf Hall, but I've been intimidated by it. I would say it's readable enough. There will parts of it a little hard going, but it's readable enough. You don't need to be intimidated by it. Um, Although, yeah, I mean, the other thing is, helps to have some historical background. Here, I'm going to part company from Steve Donoghue, who says you don't really need any historical background. I think the more historical background you have, the easier this will be to understand. And like I said, as I was reading this, I became aware that Hilary Mantel is kind of assuming that you've maybe read or seen some of the other Tudor fiction or plays like A Man for All Seasons. That being said, though, you know, don't let that put you off. I think the way to do this, it looks like, again, just based off of the comments I've seen off of BookTube, that a lot of people have read this book a couple times or three times and claim to be picking more up every time. Maybe that's the way to do it. Uh, don't put this book off. If you I mean if you have no interest in Tudor England, then don't bother with this book. But if you're interested in it, you think you might enjoy this book. Maybe read the book once and then go back and read some of the history and then come back and read it again. I mean this is BookTube here, right? This is why we're here, because we like making these reading projects for ourselves. It might be kind of fun to do. I've got it in mind maybe to do that myself, actually. Go back and maybe see if I can track down A Man for All Seasons, watch the movie or read the play. Read Shakespeare's King Henry VIII, which apparently, according to Steve Donoghue, is one of the influences on this book. See if I can track down another history of this book, or read the other Boleyn Girl, and then maybe come back to this book in a couple of years. I don't know. I might do it, I might not, but I think that would be the way to. It seems like that's the way people get a lot out of this book. I haven't even talked about half the interesting stuff in this book, but I've gone on long enough, haven't I? And I'm feeling a little bit tired of talking, so I'll just stop here. So yeah, what can I say? Sorry for all the rambling and for not really structuring this book review better. But if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know how things work here, and I'll just sign off here.